Hi, I'm Yasindu Edussuriya and I debate for Anand College. And I welcome you to the Motion Debrief series by the Debaters Council of Sri Lanka. And today I'll be debriefing the second round motion of AIS. The motion is This House regrets the rise of the chosen one narrative in pop culture. The Infoslide is given in the description, but I'll go into a basic introduction of what both sides should keep in mind when approaching this motion, and then I'll move on to argumentation and setup for both sides, and finally give a basic idea of what the clash points would look like. So, firstly, when you consider the motion, or you need to focus on the chosen one narrative, and this narrative is basically where it's a trope or a way of storytelling where the main protagonists from the start of their life or from the early ages are prophesized or destined to go out there and achieve a certain goal or resolve the main issue of that storyline. And it's often that in these tropes is that the decisions made by this protagonist doesn't really impact the final outcome, but rather it is that the destiny or this fate that they are prophesized to is what drives them to fulfill or achieve this goal or solve this problem at the end of the day. But it's important to keep in mind that there are like this type of storytelling has deviations. For instance, it's not always a hero plotline per se, because if you consider like Star Wars, the Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, was initially a hero, but he later turned into the dark side, and then he was a major villain of that storyline. But he still fulfilled his prophecy afterwards by killing the emperor. And but the thing is that it's not always going to be a full-on hero plotline every single time in these narratives per se, and that's something that op should especially keep in mind in this debate itself. But when you consider the rise in this narrative, it's important to focus on the rise itself and rise of this narrative itself, and not focus on whether this narrative should exist or not. Because both sides should focus on whether the rise of this narrative should be regretted or not. And when you consider the rise in this chosen one narrative, is basically where this most of these pop culture materials would have would be made through the storytelling of the chosen one narrative, and is going to be far more frequent and prominent in the entertainment industry, as well as it's going to get more prioritized and get more funding compared to other storytelling tropes in the entertainment industry. But moving on to proposition, in setup, it is important that proposition establishes the fact that the main stakeholder of this debate are teenagers and kids who consume these pop culture materials. Why so? Because of two main reasons. Firstly, it's because the fact that when you when the majority of the demographic of people who consume these pop culture material, which are like fantasy and fictionalized, which are going to be where the chosen or narrative is going to exist, are going to be children itself, right? Because children are more likely into things like fantasy and fiction in the first place. But secondly, it is that children are going to be the demographic that's going to be impacted the most out of all the stakeholders, because children are impressionable, and children like tend to absorb more material from these movies and whatnot compared to adults, and therefore they are get be impacted the most from this motion. And in the main burden is pretty simple. It's just to prove that the rise in this motion has done more harm to the utility of the audience, as well as more harm to these children and teenagers, and therefore that's why you should regret the existence of this rise in this certain trope. While there are many stances that side proposition could run, I think the best stance that you should run is the idea that look, we as proposition would not prefer any trope coming into prominence or coming or rising up, and would prefer a world where all tropes of storytelling would have equal ground and have equal importance. You could also run a stance where you would say an alternate trope would be in prominence and would be in the rise, but I feel that that's going to make the debate more messy, and that will push an extra burden on you as proposition to go out there and say why that certain trope becoming prominent is also good. Therefore, it is better in strategy to stick into a world where you would prefer no or prefer no certain trope coming into prominency as an alternative. But moving on to argumentation from side proposition, the main two ideas I have are firstly the idea around or the idea that revolves around how this affects these kids and teenagers who consume these materials, right? First, it's important that you establish, like in setup, that all of these kids are impressionable, therefore they absorb most of these materials. But also that since the fact that this is on the rise, a lot of the material that they consume are going to be from this trope of, like, chosen, the chosen one, and hence they're going to, like, most likely believe, or like most likely going to rely to a certain level where this is like a certain level of like truth or whatnot. Like they're gonna believe in this more compared to anything else, because that's like what they come across more frequently due to this rise in it. But to the two main mechanisms you run here to impact this argument is that firstly, when you as a kid watch this, you are given a message from these pop culture creations that in order for you to solve your problems or to achieve your goals, you need to be a chosen one. Inherently, this translates to you need to be something like from a privileged background or be rich in order to achieve your goals, right? And that's the message that's related to these kids, and where individual choices that you make won't really impact it, and you would only be able to go out there and, like, succeed if external factors that you can't change actually allow you to do something. But secondly, you can also point out how, like, you have a lack of relatability when you have this prominence. Is because often when you have a chosen one uh, pop culture materials, it's often focused on one main character, right? Most of the time, the other side characters are very neglected and don't really have any character building in the story itself. Therefore, you often are focused on one main character, and the moment you as a kid can't really relate to that character, you can't really go out there and be like, oh look, I can go out there and solve my problems as well, because now you can't relate to that character. For instance, if you are African American uh, teenager from like a very oppressed background, and if you see a white male as a protagonist, it's very very hard for you to relate, and rather you would believe that, oh look, you need to be from that certain background to go out there and solve your issues, because just as as the chosen one, you are technically kind of destined, or like you are like affected by external factors, and these external factors are what guarantees your success, and not like the decisions you make. And the impact is that you take away the agency that these children have, and like this, the ability to go out there and make decisions to impact their lives. But the second idea of argumentation is only how you negatively impact the audience or the consumers of these materials. Why? Because firstly, you can point out the fact that, oh look, when there's like a prominence in this, it's like that a lot of said movies like following this chosen or narrative are going to be made, and it's going to get very repetitive at one point, and there's going to be a lack of innovation in the entertainment industry, because now everyone's going to focus on this said trope because it's the most prominent thing, right? And therefore, as a viewer, at one point it gets boring because you're so familiar to like what happens, where a certain character is introduced as the chosen one, and then they introduce their prophecy, and they end up going and achieving this, and that's going to be very repetitive to a point that you can't really enjoy or you can't really engage with these pop culture materials anymore, because it's very repetitive, and the harm increases because the moment you want to like deviate and like choose something else that's diverse from this trope, it's very unlikely that you can find good quality writing or good quality materials, because of like the fact that the other tropes are very defunded and deprioritized within the entertainment industry. Therefore, even if you like opt out and like try something else, it's not like that you can get any entertainment from it either, because of this idea of like deprioritization and like defund, an idea of like defunding other materials in the first place. And the impact is that basically you say, oh look how you reduce the quality of storytelling you get as a consumer of these materials, and therefore this affects your net utility as an audience of like these movies and books and whatnot. But moving on to opposition, in context, I think the main thing that opposition needs to establish is the fact that, like I explained before, is that these stories aren't monotonous but rather nuanced, where even though the plot the main storytelling aspect is about like a chosen one or like a prophecy, it still can be deviated to a higher level because of the essence of like this fantasy and fiction, right? You could say, look, for instance, on one side you have like Harry Potter, and on one side you have Star Wars, which are very very different, right? And like still have higher quality of storytelling, right? You establish this and show that, oh look how you can still have multiple diversity among the storytelling tropes, even if it's the same diversity among the same trope, even if it's the same storytelling trope that is used, and you can always like deviate from like the certain hero plotline itself and use other plotlines itself, like Star Wars. But moving to argumentation, the first argument you run here is that you again show why you would have this motivation or this empowerment of agency on your side as well. A few reasons that you need to provide here. The first reason is basically on like the fact that you explain that, look, the way that kids and teenagers often analyze material and like absorb it is very different from adults, and often kids won't really consider things like backgrounds or like ethnicities or things like that about the character, but rather focus on things like qualities like things like bravery or things like resilience of the character that they have, and that's what they're attached to, rather than this idea of relatability through like like similar backgrounds or like similar ethnicities and whatnot, right? For instance, like everyone likes Captain America, but you don't need to be an American, you don't need to be like someone who like, or a white male, to like go out there and actually like him or admire him. But most kids admire him because of like his like like bravery or his qualities itself, and that's what these kids are gonna focus on more than like these qualities, because that's in the nature of kids, and that's an idea you should run as opposition. But secondly, you should say that, oh look how this sense of relatability can still exist because of this prominence, where you have a lot of material from this chosen one being published out. Therefore you can easily have multiple storylines where the chosen one is from different demographics. Therefore you can still cater towards like this idea of like relatability in your side as well, and you would still have higher quality stories with this as well because of this prominence that exists within the story, chosen one storylines in the first place. But thirdly, you could also run the idea on the fact that, look, uh, it's often that you can still you don't really need this idea of relatability, but you could still get attachment by things like emotional tension, which is the main thing that a chosen one like a movie would focus on, where you would make the audience attached like to the journey of the chosen one through like problems and whatnot, and you can like easily make these kids attached to like the chosen one from like general like problems like bullying like, and like poverty, like general obstacles, as well as like other obstacles that you can go out there and like and that this chosen one has to face, and you create this like a level of emotional tension between the character and the audience, where now you are like more emotionally attached to this character due to this, and you prove that why this is stronger than relatability, especially among children. And therefore you should have this essence of like you want to go out, you are inspired by this chosen one to go out there and solve your problems itself, and you don't really focus on this specific relatability ideas as a kid to when you are like going out there and facing your problems, and you still empower agents, and you still motivate them to go out there and make their decisions and achieve their goals. And that's the main impact in this first argument idea for opposition. But second idea is basically on the fact that how you would still increase, how you would have a user retention, as well as you would still increase the net utility of the audience, even though you have this one main trope of storytelling in pop culture on opposition, right? The main idea is that again that this idea of emotional tension builds a very high level of attachment among the audience the the characters, to a level where it's stronger than the sense of relatability or any other way of attachment, and therefore you are likely going to be more attached to these characters, and due to the fact that you are more attached to them, you are likely going to go out there and like enjoy these films more, and there's going to be a better engagement. This looks like we're like franchises like Star Wars or Harry Potter having a large follower base, as well as people like continually watching their movies because they are attached to this protagonist itself from the get-go, and that's why they continue watching these movies itself. And you can say, like, how you can create this attachment better, because of the fact that you can easily increase the emotional or increase the hardship that this said person goes through, and you can easily justify that still by, like, using this idea of prophecy to say, oh, look how they still succeed because they're prophesized to, like, win, or, like, like, succeed at the end of the day, but still make them go to, like, very, a lot of hardships that would create more attachment between these kids and teenagers and these characters, and therefore increasing the net utility and, like, the engagement of the audience in this pop culture material. But moving on to the main clashman ideas, I feel like the first clashman is going to be about which side basically empowers the, or which side promotes, like, motivation and empowers kids to, like, make their own decisions and, like, promotes that. And the main argumentation for proposition I see is that, look how you, due to this lack of uh, relatability, you lose the ability to, like, or you get demotivated to make your own decisions, but because you think that these external factors matter more, right? And the main idea that Opcon run is that, one, look, this relatability doesn't really matter because kids don't really consider it. Two is the fact that you still have a certain level of relatability on your side, but three is that you have this emotional attachment which trumps relatability on your side as well, and that's the main argumentation that Op can use to win, or weigh out to win this clash. But moving on to the second clash, which basically focuses on the idea that uh, on how which side increases the net user utility, or how which increases user engagement, right? And on proposition, you say, oh, look how this lack of relatability itself is the main reason, and this lack of innovation or, like, poor storytelling due to this being so saturated is likely to reduce the utility that the audience gets, and therefore they are going to be bored, and, like, therefore this harms the engagement and the enjoyment a certain individual gets by watching these movies. The main argument, or the main argumentation that op runs is that, look how, again, this attachment or this investment that you create in these movies due to these emotional attachments that you make are good enough for people to still be attached to this, and are in fact better ways to, like, create more engagement and improve and have a better sense of utility with these creations compared to proposition. And that's basically the majority, or that's basically the end of the debrief. I hope you all found this useful. Thank you.